Commissioner Helm just left. Shoot.
Look like the general plan from 2002 did not include.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. We'll get started in maybe just a minute. Let everybody get into the meeting and get settled. For now, I'd like to ask everybody, please mute your microphones. And also, if you guys have a camera, feel free to turn your camera on. We'd like to be able to see everybody if possible.
No.
Okay, I got 6:01. Why don't we get going? First off, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Choi from the Department of Hawaiian Home Lands to open us up.
Oh, hi, everyone. Welcome to the second round of beneficiary consultation meetings regarding the general plan update. Before we begin, I'd like to turn it over to Ulu Lota from our office. She'll be giving us a pule.
Aloha e pulikako, our dear kind and gracious Heavenly Father, as we gather this evening through technology for our Zoom meeting, we humbly ask that your spirit and your blessings be upon us with our consultants, with our beneficiaries, and more importantly, the spoken words that will be shared by all. At the end of the meeting, we humbly ask that any and all questions that need to be addressed can be forthcoming thereafter. And again, we humbly ask you bless each and every one of us this day as we humbly go forward with the Department of Hawaiian Home Lands and all of its beneficiaries and its staff and its leadership. And we do so humbly in your name, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen.
Mahalo, Ulu. And once again, just thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules to spend time with us tonight and share your mana'o regarding the general plan update. I'm going to pass it back to Jared Chang of SSFM. SSFM is the consultant that is assisting the department with the preparation of this general plan.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. All right, aloha and welcome, everyone. This is our first meeting in round 2 of beneficiary consultation for the general plan update. This meeting is being recorded and will be later posted to the website we have for this project. So let's get started. On the screen, we got tonight's agenda. We're going to start with some quick introductions and some housekeeping. We'll do a quick recap on where we're at overall in the general plan update process. And then we'll move on to tonight's policy topics, which we are covering land use, water resources, and infrastructure. And then we'll close with a quick recap and next steps. Okay, introductions. You heard from Andrew Choi. He's the acting planning program manager at DHHL. I saw we also have Julianne Cachola. She's a planner at DHHL also with us tonight. And Ulu, I think, also with the department that blessed us with the pule. From our side, I am Jared Chang. I am the principal in charge on this one, and I'll be tonight's facilitator for this meeting. We also have Melissa May, our project manager and senior planner. Malachi Krishak, another planner with us, and Matt Fernandez, another planner. So this is essentially the planning team from DHHL and SSFM for the update. I also want to acknowledge someone in the audience. We have Commissioner Zachary Helm with us tonight. So just wanted to aloha. Okay, our kuleana for this meeting includes being respectful of others and showing aloha by not interrupting anyone else, and try to keep yourself muted when not speaking. When you want to speak, please use the Zoom raise your hand function and wait on me to call on you first before you unmute yourself and then start speaking. There will be times when we must agree to disagree. So let's all keep that in mind, and that others' opinions may differ from our own and for good reason. And finally, please everyone keep an open mind and be open to any new information or ideas that are shared tonight. Here's a quick tutorial on how to use Zoom. So starting on the left side of your screen, at the bottom, you should find your mute and unmute button. Next to that is the video on and off button. And like I said earlier, we would appreciate if everybody's videos would be on, if possible. In the center of the screen, you can see the chat button that opens the chat window. Feel free to use the chat, put questions or comments in there. Try not to do too much sidebar discussions in there that could clog it up. Anything that goes into the chat, we'll do our best to try and bring to the rest of the group. And next to that on the right is the reactions button. This is where you're going to find the raise your hand function right over there. Okay. All right, tonight we are also using Mentimeter. So we're going to be doing some live polling during the meeting. We hope to get 100% of all participants participating in the polling sections. Here's a tip. Open up a new web browser right now if you can. Go to menti.com, punch in the code shown on the screen, 73601889.
Okay, you can push. Did you
Uh,
find or?
Sorry, Jared, sorry to interrupt. The code is actually
oh, sorry, yeah. I'm reading off of
4121.
the wrong one. Code is 41216261 on the screen. Go ahead and punch that in. It'll take you to the set of questions that we have set up already for tonight's meeting. Leave it open and then we'll prompt you throughout the meeting when to go answer the next question. Okay, purpose of tonight's meeting. Basically, I want to give you an update on the general plan process. And then we want to dive right into exploring existing conditions and future policies for land use, water resources, and infrastructure. And the most important part for us is to hear from you, get your feedback on what's presented tonight. All right, that was the intro and housekeeping. Let's jump right into the update on where we're at in this process. So I'm going to cover a quick overview of where we're at. So this next slide, we're showing the different plans that make up the DHHL planning system. And right at the top is the general plan. That's in tier 1. So the general plan serves as a 20-year guiding document that identifies the vision, the long-term goals and priorities for DHHL and Hawaiian Homes Commission. And the general plan basically sets the foundation for the rest of the programs, policies, and plans in the planning system, down the ones you see below. Okay, next slide. So did we skip a slide? Yeah, okay, here. So in this general plan update, like I said, we want to set the vision for the next 20 years for the department and beneficiaries, set the policies to guide the department in the next 20 years. This update must also meet new requirements set forth in Hawaii Administrative Rules, Title 10, Chapter 4, Section 55. I'll show them in the next slide. The updated plan should also include innovative and pragmatic goals and policies to be used by the department, the commission, beneficiaries, decision makers, everyone. And finally, the plan will also identify measures, new measures to measure success and assess the progress toward achieving the vision and goals from this update in the general plan. Okay. Here are the minimum general plan requirements that we have to fulfill in this update. This is coming out of the Hawaii Administrative Rules. I believe this was updated in 2018. So there's 8 basic minimum requirements that the update has to have. And we have a little legend down at the bottom to help show what general topics these fall into for each requirement. So I'm going to start from the top. It's a green box around the first 2. This is related to creating a uniform system of land use designations and related types of land dispositions across the state. So the next one down, 3 through 6, is gold. This is relating to establishing criteria for identifying homesteading lands and non-homesteading lands. lands for revenue generation, and lands for community use. So I might have said that fast, but it's basically what is the criteria that we have to follow for identifying these types of lands. The next one down, number 7, is blue. That's related to establishing a level of service standards for infrastructure and community facilities. The last one, purple, relates to the need for an evaluation system to measure success. So today, our focus will be on numbers 1, 3, 4, and 7, essentially the land uses and the infrastructure level of service standards. All right, here is our project timeline. This is an overview of the project schedule. As you can see, we started back in 2020 and we're shooting for approximately a 2-year process to get this whole plan updated. We started with stakeholder interviews and background research. We went into our first round of beneficiary consultation. That was back in March and April of this year. And then it's November now, and we're kicking off with this very meeting, the second round of beneficiary consultation. We hope to have a third and final round of beneficiary consultation in the May-June timeframe of next year, and then ultimately to get to a final adopted plan update before the end of 2022. Okay, just a quick recap of what we did in round 1 and what we covered. Round 1 had 2 parts to it and a total of 6 meetings. In the first part, we introduced the project and we collected input to use to draft the vision statement for the plan. In part 2, we presented the draft vision statement that was using what we heard from round 1. We had just under 300 people participate in the first round of meetings. We had 262 people, individual people, visit our open house, online open house, which is now back open for this round. The meetings, just like this one, they were all recorded and available on DHHL's YouTube channel. The project website had the recordings also, and we also had them played over public TV stations local. All right, round 2, this is where we're at. We're in the phase of the project right now where we're starting to explore each policy topic that's going to be covered in the general plan update. And then we're providing the opportunity now on these topics to get your input on goals and policies for each topic. We have planned 4 sets of meetings, starting with this one between now and February. And then you can see on the left side of this table here, what topics are going to be covered in each meeting. The meeting tomorrow night on the 4th is going to be the exact same as this meeting. So same presentation, we're just trying to make it as available as possible, and everybody's busy. So every meeting is going to be like that. We'll have 2 meetings for each topic, each set, and they'll be basically the same meetings back to back. In December, we're going to cover housing and food production. In January, we're going to be covering healthy communities, natural and cultural resources. And then in February, we're going to be covering revenue generation and economic development. So hopefully you guys can all make it to at least one of each of the 4. And a quick reminder on where we ended up with the draft vision statement. Just to set, I guess, how we set it up and how it should be set up is that this is a shared vision of the future where we all want to be at come 2040. So the shared vision for 2040. And in this next slide, here are the draft vision elements that we ended up with based on the first round of consultations. Now, the overarching theme across all of these is self-sufficiency. And within that, we identified a need for, in this first one, trust lands, to be able to nurture and sustain beneficiary communities through uses on homesteading and non-homesteading lands. The next one, there was a need for beneficiary communities to be self-sufficient, healthy, prosperous, and grounded in cultural knowledge and traditions. The next one, a need for beneficiaries to be thriving on the land and engage in activities that support the rehabilitation and self-determination of all Hawaiians. The next one, a need for DHHL to be sufficiently funded, transparent, with beneficiaries and collaborative towards achieving the vision. and for all, a need for all Hawaii to support the implementation of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. So this vision statement is also available on the project website for you guys to go check out. And that was the end of the project updates. So we can dive right into our first policy topic discussion. And I'm going to turn it back over to Malachi for that. Thank you.
Awesome. Mahalo, Jared. Okay, my name is Malachi Krishak. As Jared mentioned, I'm a planner with SSFM. So let's get into it. This part of the meeting will provide an overview of how the general plan will talk about land use and how DHL decides what lands to use for homesteads and other uses. And we'll also briefly touch on how DHL will manage water resources into the future related to land use. So how does DHL think about land use? So the Hawaiian Home Lands program's purpose is to enable Native Hawaiians to return to their lands in order to fully support self-sufficiency for Native Hawaiians. And this is accomplished primarily through the land assets of the trust. Something that's important to note is that the Hawaiian Homes Commission actually has the authority to set its own land use designations. So it actually doesn't need to follow the county zoning or state land use framework. Although it does have to comply with some health and safety requirements, but really when it comes to land use, the department can make its own decisions. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The department's main role is to determine how to utilize Hawaiian Home Lands for the betterment, of the beneficiaries. I have a stutter, so you might hear it a few times, but and the trust actually, and they make these decisions by looking at a number of factors, including info from beneficiaries, land suitability analysis, other best practices in planning. And you may already know, but the model that's currently in place for land use really is focused on developing mostly single family homes and lots, as well as generating revenue on trust lands that can through leases, and the revenue can be put back into the trust. But this general plan update process allows us to revisit and redefine how DHL thinks about land use, which is a really big opportunity. And we're excited to see so many people here, and we're really interested and need you to share your mana'o on this. So mahalo for being here. As Jared mentioned, there are specific requirements that the general plan needs to address. In this section, we'll talk about these four, mainly a uniform system of land use designations. We'll briefly touch on the relationship between land use designations and applicable types of land disposition. And then we'll talk about criteria and policies to identify land suitable for homesteading, and then those lands not required for homesteading within this planning period. So why are we talking about land use, water resources, and infrastructure all together in this first meeting?
I would like to have tacos.
Well, it's because access to land and water are really at the core of Prince Kuhio's vision for the rehabilitation of Hawaiian people. Adequate amounts of water and supporting infrastructure are really the key for homestead lands to be usable and accessible for the benefit of Native Hawaiians. So when we're planning for land uses, we're actually also planning for the water needs and infrastructure needs that are connected to those land uses. Just something to keep in mind as we have our discussion today. So how is DHL using its land today? This might look familiar to some of you who read the annual report, but this is just the current inventory of DHL's land and current land use designations. Right now, you can see that about 60% of the lands are in non-homestead uses like general agriculture, special district, conservation. Those are existing land use designations. This also includes industrial and commercial uses, but if you look at the bottom in the green, those only make up about 1% of the land use right now. Homestead lands make up about 35% of DHL's 200,000 plus acres. But the number can be a little misleading because you look at up at the second one here, the pastoral homestead uses make up the largest chunk of that, but there's actually only like around 400 pastoral leases in existence statewide right now. So really, we're looking at supplemental agriculture, residential subsistence ag as kind of the main homestead uses here. So this is an important slide for everyone to soak in. This is what our process is as in updating the general plan land use designations. So what are we doing to update the land use designations? And the first step was to document and understand the needs and desires of beneficiaries wish to see and experience on Hawaiian homelands, which is what we talked about in that first round of meetings, as Jared mentioned. And the next piece of this was to connect those needs and desires with the vision and guiding principles. So the vision that Jared just shared, which was also developed in that first round of meetings. So the result of these first two steps was the synthesis or creation of 4 main benefit categories that I'll share in a few slides that we hope that land use designations and land use on Hawaiian homelands will help support and address. And you'll see them throughout this process as they come up. So from there, we revisited the existing land use designations and developed land use categories that are centered on the range of uses that support those needs and desires that were expressed. And that's the purpose of this meeting, is to share and discuss these proposed land use designations. So we'll get into that shortly. But going back to that first step, here's a very simplified summary of some of the needs and desires that we heard in that first round of consultation. We heard desires for traditional cultural uses and ways of living on Hawaiian homelands, more opportunities and ways to steward and malama aina. We also heard that folks desire homestead communities that are self-sufficient and include a variety of housing types and options. There's also support for all kinds of farming and other economic opportunities for beneficiaries on Hawaiian homelands. So we tried to address that in the land use designations, as well as this last one, which is kind of general support for sustainability and food security through use of Hawaiian homelands. So these are the benefits I referenced earlier. So everything that we heard was organized kind of into these 4 main types of benefits that are tied back to the vision and guiding principles that were developed in that first round. You can see this kind of long list underneath, but I'll summarize briefly. So on the left, we have sustainable trust, and this encompasses activities that ensure that trust assets will be maintained or enhanced for future generations of beneficiaries. The next is healthy land and water, which covers activities that ensure that trust lands and water are protected and restored, cared for, and able to provide for beneficiaries and the trust. Strong communities are activities that strengthen the lahui, that build connections, that just overall promote health and well-being for Hawaiians. And empowered beneficiaries are activities and opportunities for families and individuals to be self-sufficient and to thrive here in Hawaii. So how do we use land use designations? Land use designations play a really important role for us as planners, but you can think of them as a toolbox that is flexible, and we really want them to cover the full range of uses and activities that are desired on Hawaiian homelands. So when you're planning for a specific place, we want it to be where you can reach into that toolbox and you can find what you need to help kind of articulate your vision for that place. So in DHL's planning system that Jared briefly touched on, land use designations are assigned through a community process in the island planning, in the island plans. But they can be further refined through like master planning of specific areas and specific communities too. This is just an example of land use designations that are currently in place. This is a map for Waimanalo from the Oahu Island Plan, which was adopted in 2014. You can see, there's a range here in yellow. There's a homestead uses, land use designation. In blue here are the dots. This is actually all in conservation. Purple is industrial. So you can see communities, encompass usually a mix of uses. So going back to that process, we covered those first two with the desires and the vision guiding principles connecting to those categories. So now we want to share and get your feedback on the proposed land use designations for this update. And also at the end, we'll get your input on criteria and policies that will help guide DHHL and the Hawaiian Homes Commission in decisions or as they decide what lands to use for homesteading or other uses. This is another important slide before we get into specific land use designations, because land use currently falls under two kind of main categories of trust lands: homesteading and non-homesteading uses. So this distinction is important because it acknowledges that not all trust lands are able to be developed into homesteads. So homestead uses are lands that are developable for residential, agricultural, pastoral uses, and these are awarded to beneficiaries through 99-year homestead leases. But then there's non-homestead uses, which cover basically everything else, and those can be lands that are developable, but maybe not needed or suitable for homesteading in the near term. And they also could include lands that are undevelopable, long term. And these lands are either leased, there's licenses or right of entry permits are given. So we'll get into each of the proposed land use designations for this general plan update. I just want to, before I get into it, I do want to say that we're going to go through all of the homestead, all of the land use designations here, but there will be more opportunities throughout the future meetings that Jared shared as we get into more specific topics like residential, food production, natural culture resources, revenue generation. We're going to be revisiting these. So this is the first time you're seeing these land use designations, but it's definitely not the last, and not the last time you'll get a chance to think about them, have feedback, have comments on them. So we're going to run through all of them. Just to give an idea of what's on the slide, in the top box on the top, you'll see the box with kind of the definition of it. On the left here, we have a summary of the allowed uses, like what kind of activities and uses would be allowed under this land use designation. Some pictures here, and then these are the categories that we shared earlier. So how is this land use designation supporting the overall vision and the guiding principles through those categories? First one here is familiar. It's residential. This is an existing land use designation, for various types of housing and dwellings. One small change that we're considering is creating sub-districts that may be established to differentiate between areas for single-family housing and maybe more multi-family type housing for residential leases. This one small change. The next is subsistence agriculture, another existing one. This is small lot agriculture. There are recent changes since the last general plan and the administrative rules for this. There's the option to build a home on it. Subsistence agriculture lots are intended for lifestyles, for small scale agriculture that could for home consumption or could supplement your income. The next is supplemental agriculture, another existing one. We did hear some feedback on this, but this is a large lot agriculture. It's intended for more commercial, larger scale production of agriculture products. You can also have a home on this land too. Then there's pastoral, another familiar one. This is a large lot agriculture specifically for pastoral uses, which means you're not growing crops, but you're raising livestock on it basically. This requires, ranch plans and fencing. There haven't been a lot of pastoral leases given out. Now, this is a new land use designation, but it might be a familiar use to some people. So we're proposing a new kuleana land use designation. And this would be for areas that are more raw with not as much available infrastructure. So they're intended for kind of off the grid subsistence lifestyles to allow, but this allows for more choices of how lessees wish to develop their lots. It reduces some of the big barriers in terms of financing, but it is a specific kind of lifestyle it's geared toward. You could live on it, you can grow food on it, ranching. So those are the residential, and now we're going to get into two new land use categories, which bring together that homestead and non-homestead uses, and these are called mixed uses. So the first mixed use that we're proposing is neighborhood mixed use. Which would be geared towards more residential homestead lots, where we allowed low intensity commercial activities in addition to those residential uses by lessees. So, we'd have to have controls. There'd be administrative rules in place to implement this. But as you can see with the allowed uses, it allows for a wider range of uses closer together, which maybe provide opportunities to live and work, close to each other, have more economic opportunities for beneficiaries on homestead lands is the goal. The other mixed use is central mixed use, and this would actually would be replacing the existing commercial designation, and it's for areas that are suitable for more concentrated commercial uses or higher density housing, like in urban areas or neighborhood centers. So the housing may be intermixed with commercial. It could potentially be residential, but also include the non-homesteading residential uses that are allowed with the new administrative rules. So like rentals or kupuna housing, which wouldn't be homestead leases, but they would provide housing, affordable housing for beneficiaries. And this is a wide range of uses in here, from multifamily dwellings all the way to retail, grocery store, banks, could be a range of things. So those are the mixed uses, and now we're going into the non-homestead land uses. The first one is another new land use designation that we're proposing, and it would replace, in a sense, the general agriculture land use designation, and it's called Stewardship. And the intent of this is for land not currently used for homesteading. It would allow uses that maintain the value and condition of the land and provide benefit to the trust and to beneficiaries, but it would serve more as an interim use until opportunities for higher or better uses become available. So it wouldn't have such an impact on the land where homesteads couldn't be developed there in the future, or other uses that are more permanent. So things like small scale agriculture. You have access for traditional, for gathering traditional resources, or even in maybe areas where you can hunt, but also malama aina activities, potentially renewable energy. But this is a more of an interim use that you'd think of. Conservation is the next one. This is a non-homestead use that's already in existence. It's for really environmentally sensitive areas. One wrinkle that we're proposing is adding new sub-districts to be considered, which could be used to identify, how sensitive the areas actually are on a more specific level, which might allow for more access or more specific uses like restoration uses in certain areas, or access for game management, traditional gathering, education even. And might be an example of this is a state conservation district. They have sub-districts that allow various types of uses and intensities. The next proposed land use designation is another existing one, special district. Areas requiring special attention, or unusual opportunities. This one's kind of broad, so we're suggesting sub-districts again for this one that could be included to be more specific about what the unusual opportunities and constraints are. So it could be cultural resources, or maybe areas that are prone to natural hazards or projected to be impacted by sea level rise, and that will help direct kind of what specific activities can take place on that land in the island planning process. This is another familiar one, community use. It's for common areas of community use and facilities. It's really provides spaces for communities to come together. It could be community-based economic development from a homestead association, could be parks, other facilities. But we are proposing another community use that's more specific, and that's community agriculture, because we heard the need for food, the desire for food production and the need for food self-sufficiency. So these would be common areas for cultivating agricultural products by multiple users. And it would be specific uses would be tied to agriculture, aquaculture, potentially small scale. And the last one, a familiar one, industrial. The industrial uses on DHL lands are typically light industrial activities, processing, wholesale, warehousing, those type of activities. But you can see the list on the left is quite long, because industrial land use is usually the least restrictive in terms of the uses. So that's those are the proposed land use designations in the plan. And again, they're up on the website. You can read them a little bit more carefully. We're going to revisit them constantly throughout this process. But just to recap kind of the key changes that are proposed from the existing, in Homestead, it's creating residential sub-districts potentially that would create room for single family or multifamily areas, adding the kuleana land use designation for more hard to reach places. And then there's these new mixed use land use designations, one smaller scale for neighborhood mixed use to create areas where some commercial uses are allowed in residential areas, primarily for the economic benefit of the beneficiaries. And then there's the central mixed use, which will be more urbanized areas, higher density, mix of residential and commercial uses, potentially having room for rentals for the department. And then the non-homestead changes, moving general agriculture to create stewardship designation, the more interim use, creating special district subzones to be more specific, and then creating conservation subzones to again be more specific about what the allowable uses are. So I know there's a lot of information. This is a time to ask questions and discuss. I'm going to pass it back to Jared to facilitate this piece.
Yeah, thank you. That was quite a bit of information and slides. Malachi just ran through 13 different types of land uses. Melissa posted to the chat a link that takes you to the Project Open House website, where you can go get these slides, or you can go look at them now while we're talking. Right now we're going to open it up for any thoughts, questions, comments. And hopefully you guys can get to the raise your hand function, and I'll be able to see when your hand is raised and I'll call on you.
Jared, there's several questions and comments in the chat that came in during Malachi's presentation. Maybe we can get to those.
Yeah, I wrote them down. So with no hands coming up, I'll start to go through some of the comments that I was picking up on in the chat. First one, I think it was, is this going to rescind the 2002 and 1976 general plan? So the previous two versions of the general plan, I don't think it rescinds it, but it does replace them. So this is supposed to build off of the last plan and look at the next 20 years. I think that's the correct statement, Andrew?
That's correct. And then the second part of that question is, and I believe this is Jojo. It's the second part of the question is can the land use designations be changed? The answer is yes, but not through the general plan process. The land use designations for each island would be changed through the island planning process, where the department would have conversations specific to beneficiaries on each island about how some of these land use designations would be applied to their specific island, or or conversely, what land use designations they would not like to see applied. As Malachi mentioned, this is kind of just a toolbox, like picture like a crayon box. Like we are creating the different colors in the crayon box that you can use to color in your picture for your community and your island. You don't have to use all the colors, but we just wanted to make sure that the colors are available so you can use it. So that's kind of what we're trying to do in the general plan process, is just to create the different colors in the crayon box. And then when we get to the island planning processes, then each island community can decide which colors they would like to select out of the box to color their community.
Yeah, good analogy. And I'll add one more on top of that. You know, I had kind of gone through it fast, but I had covered the Hawaii administrative rules requirements that basically say what is the minimum requirements that this update of the general plan has to hit. And the first boxes are create a uniform set of land use designations, basically from this point for all the plans to use. So they're using the same crayon box, to use Andrew's analogy. Okay, no hands still. I'll keep going. I saw one comment: traditional land use designation should be added. I'd like to hear more about what your thoughts are on a traditional land use designation, or if some of the uses in that recommendation would fit in any of the ones we proposed or should change. Aquaculture homestead uses should be added. I saw that one too. We did have aquaculture listed on our, which one was it?
Yeah, the way we have it right now, it's because we have the uses allowed. We have it listed on a number of the allowable uses, but yes, there's no proposed specific designation. So
just want to clarify on that one. Blossom, were you suggesting that we create one specific use category called aquaculture?
Well, you know, I noticed in the beginning slides, aloha everybody, that where you had residential, agriculture, and pastoral uses, aquaculture was not included in the beginning part of your slide presentation. But I did notice that it was included in the land use designations. So,
Okay.
you know, just to clarify, but thank you. Yeah, no, I saw that.
yeah, I hear
Okay.
what you're saying. Okay, mahalo,
Great.
Blossom.
Okay,
But you know, I do have a question since I got you. One of the things I noticed in most of your designations when it was non-homesteading, you had game management listed. Yeah. And because game management is actually a function of DOFA and DLNR, they're the only ones that actually do hunting rules and stuff, and they're the only ones statutorily authorized to do that. How would we go about deploying that plan? You know what I mean? Because DHHL does not have the authority to establish like game management areas or issue hunting permits or stuff like that. So while I agree that we should have some kind of land use designation where our ungulates are, I think that the game management activity should be more in line with ungulate removal for preservation purposes and reforestation. You know what I mean? So it should be an activity of the stewardship process, because ungulates have such a negative impact on our what, for lack of a better term, our wildlands, right? That oftentimes if that the ungulate species run unchecked, you will see absolute devastation in those very special places. And so, you know, I would like to have a deeper discussion about that kind of activity.
Yeah, I would imagine public hunting units, you know, it's all managed by DOFA, Division of Forestry and Wildlife, but there would be a lease to the state for those lands?
So I think it's important. I think you brought up a good point, Blossom, that it's important to distinguish that the department doesn't have hunting authority and that we need to identify areas where we need to manage ungulates. And I think, you know, there are different ways we can manage ungulates besides the hunting license that the department is or has explored, like trapping, community harvest, community driving of Unguit. So I think maybe we can take a look at it and talk about more, calling it something more in line with what the department's limits are.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, I had two hands up, Freitas Ohana and then Cora. So Freitas Ohana, go ahead. You can unmute yourself and speak.
Aloha kako. Mahalo for the presentation. But you know, I have a problem with every time a governor comes sit on the seat and he has to elect his cabinets. So now we have the cabinets with Isla and all these commissioners. How realistic would this plan carry out? Because every 4 years it changes, then it gets pushed underneath the rug. For 40 years, I watched this. For 40 years, they don't pick up the slack that was left behind or correct the wrong and make it right. I watched it for 40 years. And now your guys' cabinet coming out with this. The realistic of this for 20 years is not so realistic. In all due respect to the commissioners and everybody on the panel. The realistic thing is the economy is growing at a fast pace. Technology is in the mix right now. So to visualize how you want your land look like, I suggest that you go back to all those meetings that I've been in for 40 years and see what the comments was. I think you will get a brighter idea on what we were voicing for 40 years to make sure things will come out right and not where we are today, which the list is long. This is that and this and that, and the funds are short. Look at the comments that the people made. That's how come they get so frustrated when they go into meetings and we're face to face. All those comments that was made. Owner builder was one of the top things to make sure you guys don't have that burden. And the people, we are construction people. The Native Hawaiian people know how to build houses. And a lot of us have contractors license. You guys talk about lock and turnkey. A lot of them wanted lock and turnkey. I did not see any data would back that word up. Like I said, for 40 years, we've been voicing this to make sure that we don't run into a problem what we see today. And that's what I'm looking at. So I suggest you guys go back, in all due respect to you guys, and go look what was the issue way back then and push them forward, because you're gonna see the majority voicing, especially traditional practices, especially the conservation lands. You guys give contract to one contractor to go hunt the wild pee-pee up there. What about the rest? All this kind of stuff was already put up before. And we had meetings after meetings, and I'm sitting again on this meeting again, hashing it out. You guys need to go back and look what the comments was made. And I tell you something, you can get the majority saying the same stuff today, like me, that all this stuff gotta stop and put the people on the land who can build houses. And most time we got aunties, uncles, cousins, relatives, sisters, brothers, who we end up helping to build their houses. So that so-called mortgage doesn't reach 300,000. A package home, 4-bedroom, 3-bath is $54,000 right now at Hansador with appliances. Why are we not looking into that? Why are not we doing that? I'm concerned myself for my future generations, my grandkids, my kids. We're all into construction. My whole family is into construction. You guys been holding a deaf ear and a blind eye all this time. We've been voicing this. So that way you don't take the land and give it to commercial use for 25 years, an extension another 25, and leave us out in the cold when those people on the commercial land is making millions, and what do we have? Not even the loose change. That upsets me. That really upsets me. I can tell you how many people you got out there on the commercial land for what? If you had that much people on your guys on DHHL commercial land renting them, then why are we here stuck? Cannot build the infrastructure, cannot do this. You got to bring outside people in. Use their money, we can go build infrastructure. Olehiki. You already have that in place. What are you doing with that money? Or aren't you charging market price rent? That is the law. That's what upsets me. I've been watching this go on and on for years. Every time the governor changed, the seat changes. You guys forgot about all those other stuff in the back. I know that's a luggage, hash it under the rug. But we don't forget. A lot of us don't forget. And that's why you get a lot of upset people. I am one of them. 40 years in the making. And I tell you something, I still don't have nothing. Shame on you guys. I'm gonna play the devil advocate here. I'm gonna show you that flip side. We sit in this seat and I sit along all you guys for years and years and years. You guys going in circle and we're telling you guys, so you guys know hear us. 54,000 at Hanzado for a 4-bedroom, 3-bed house. I don't know why you guys not looking into that. Support the economy. Support my uncles and aunties that work at Hanzador. Support that. Keep the money in our state, not going out of the state into another state. Keep the money here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, Cora.
Oh, mahalo, Auntie Freda's right on. I hear you and I support what you said. Okay, so I got about 6 questions I have. My first question is your time frame, your project time frame on this plan. Does it coincide with existing projects that is happening today? Will it coincide with the time frame? That's my question.
I guess, well, the time frame that we are shooting for is October of next year. We know that we have other existing homestead development projects currently going, because ideally they would line up, but we would like to try to have them line up so that we could apply these new land uses to some of the existing homestead projects, but we cannot guarantee that.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, I also support Auntie Blossom when she talked about, I would like to have more exploration in a community harvest. I think there should be talks a little bit about how are we able to look at gaming and hunting and all that in sustaining our people's food sovereignty and sustainability. So I like to have more discussions around that, and maybe revise some of your folks' policies to meet our people's needs. So the one up that I had is with the land use neighborhood mixed use and central mixed use. Those are new land use designations, but because part of it, you mentioned about revenue, you mentioned about economical or anywhere that they could make money. So what about mercantile? Is this part of where our people will have be able to, given the opportunity to do mercantile? Because when we talk about economic or revenues, that's like business. So my question is there room, land designations for mercantile? That's part of in our act. So I just wanted to bring that up.
So when we were considering the mixed use category, it was largely in part from the input that we received from the first round of beneficiary consultation about mercantile licenses and about providing more opportunities for beneficiary-owned businesses to have a space on Hawaiian Home Lands to carry out economic activity. So when we conceived of the neighborhood mixed use district, as Malachi had mentioned, it would allow a homestead lessee, probably a residential homestead lessee, to carry out commercial activity on their properties.
Yay.
So I mean, the important thing is when we develop these communities, you know, we need to make it explicit to potential future lessees that in this particular area, there will be you'll have your residents, but your neighbors and yourself may be participating in commercial activities. So is this a suitable neighborhood for you? Is that something you'd like? Because not all of our beneficiaries might want to live in that type of situation, but that we've heard a lot about the department trying to provide opportunities for beneficiaries to pursue their business dreams. And yeah.
I have three more. Thanks, Andrew. I got three more. I can make it as quick as possible. The non-Hawaiian use land, how is that determined that it's not warrant for homestead? Because we got so much waitlisters. So how does a non-home-land use
non-homestead land use?
Yeah, how is that determined?
So that's a really good question, because that transitions us to the next set of conversation, which is we as part of this general plan process, we need to establish criteria to designate homesteading areas and non-homesteading areas, and we need beneficiary feedback on those criteria.
So you're saying that hasn't been determined yet, is that correct?
It hasn't been determined. Generally, in some of our development plan processes for new homesteads, we want to identify areas where it's suitable to place homesteaders. And by suitable, I mean generally we want to put people in flatter areas. We don't want to put them on a slope, steep slope. We want to put people. We are blessed to have lots of cultural resources on Hawaiian Home Lands, and where those cultural resources are located, it's probably not suitable to place a homestead lot in that particular area. So we want to avoid those. So we have basic criteria where we try to designate areas that are suitable for homesteading, but we want to, through this general plan process, we want to formalize those criteria so that they're applied consistently across all of our island plans, and that they're documented in the plans for future staff and future beneficiaries to refer to, so that we all have a common understanding of how lands get used by the department.
Okay, I just go make one side note and I get my last question. My side note is, if there wasn't any criteria for non-use land, then there shouldn't have been going out for leasing or commercial use. If there wasn't any criteria, I just wanted to make a side note, because our people is the one that should be our top priority. But I just wanted to make a side note. Okay, my last one is, when we talk about land use, right? And we're talking about all these years, I wanted to make a note. And specifically, maybe you can shed some light, Kalapapa. I know I got to bring this one up because it was up for review during a land use designation in 2020. And this never came forward for consultation, beneficial consultation prior to the expiration of the license. But this, I believe, just got recently renewed. Is there an appeal process that if the beneficiaries don't agree and they haven't been part of the process, is there an appeal process that our beneficiary can do?
Just to clarify, Kalaupapa in our Molokai Island plan is currently designated as special district. It was designated as special district at the adoption of the Molokai Island plan in 2004. The department hasn't made any changes to that particular land use designation. I think what has happened recently with regards to Kalaupapa is that the National Park Service has, who is the lessee of Kalaupapa from the department, they have over the last 10 years endeavored to create a general management plan that they would use and follow. And a lot of what we've been hearing from our beneficiaries involved with Kalaupapa is that the National Park Service didn't do a good job of communicating with beneficiaries during that process. And perhaps we need to relook at our relationship with the National Park Service to fix some of the transgressions that have occurred. So that's kind of a longer answer to your simple question.
No, Andrew, mahalo. I respect your answer. I think it's a good answer. I like to make two remarks before I pass this on. One is that I am very offended that the fact that our Hawaiian people is being exploited through the national park. I don't think that's pono in itself. And I would like this revisit because I think there's a loud voice out there in our beneficiary community. Mahalo, everyone. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you. Let's move into the next section. So we're going to actually talk about the criteria for selecting homestead and non-homesteading lands next. This is a good transition.
Yeah,
Back to Malachi.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Mahalo and to Cora for kicking us off and giving Evan a preview, and Andrew too. But yeah, this next section is actually going to address that HAR criteria that we talked about in identifying suitable lands for homesteading. This is the first one, kind of the priority. So what makes land suitable for homesteading? Actually, before I get into this, if everyone had a chance to do the Mentimeter, we're going to have some Mentimeter questions attached to this. So if you want to open up your Mentimeter and get ready for that, that will help speed up the discussion too. We'll have a discussion and have the live polling too, same time. So what makes a land suitable for homesteading? As Andrew mentioned, there are some kind of existing things that the department looks at or are kind of best practices in planning. And the first thing usually you look at is the land characteristics. Andrew mentioned this, like you look at the slope. Are there flat areas that are more easily developable or won't require a lot of expensive grading to make them developable? You also look at, are there streams, wetlands, waterways? Is there room for the water to flow without being a risk of flooding? Or more infrastructure to be built to address that? Are there critical habitats, endangered species present that would require some barriers, or that would present some barriers for developing the area for homesteads and homes? Also looking at soil, like you want stable soil for homes, but also if we're looking at agricultural or subsistence agriculture lots, is it fertile? Can you grow food? You look at the climate, rainfall is important for agricultural lots, other hazards, other climate hazards to be aware of. And then Andrew also mentioned this, are there cultural resources there that need to be protected and limit the areas where homes can be? Other considerations that came up in, actually a lot of you folks mentioned in the first round of meetings, but also are in the best practices too. But we heard that proximity to jobs in existing communities is important to a lot of beneficiaries. existing and nearby infrastructure is a really important consideration when talking about development costs. And although the Hawaiian Homes Commission and Hawaiian Homelands aren't subject to underlying land uses from the state or county, being aware of what exists around is an important consideration because it kind of tells you of what the surrounding community, what resources or services are surrounding the community. This is an important one, place names, historical uses. A lot of the times the Hawaiian place names will tell you about like the characteristics of the land just through the name, right? So you know, so understanding that and having an understanding of that is important. And then I think this came up too in one of the comments, but existing encumbrances or easements and leases, right? If we're talking about immediate possibilities to develop homes, if there's an existing lease for another use that's, you know, long-term, then it impacts the ability. So those are the kind of the criteria summary we're talking about, and get feedback on those and ideas for what other criteria. But the general plan is a policy plan. So how those criteria will be established is through policies. So we came up with some general draft policy direction to run past you folks to see if these capture kind of those criteria that that should be explored when identifying lands for homestead uses. So I'm going to read through these and then we'll get some feedback and discussion. So the first one, acknowledging existing place names, historical uses, and cultural knowledge. Ensure availability of water resources for residential and agricultural uses. Prioritize homestead communities in areas close to jobs, infrastructure, and services. Ensure homestead communities include or have access to parks, open space, community gathering places, paths, and other elements of healthy communities. Consider adjacent land uses and existing long-range plans of the county in land use planning. The sixth one, these are not in any order, sorry, I should have mentioned that first, but not in order of priority. But the next one is incorporate future climate change and hazard impacts into land use planning. And then continue considering the kuleana homestead opportunities for remote locations that otherwise would not support development of homesteads. So those are the criteria, and then kind of those criteria articulated as policies. And I hope folks had a chance to go through into the Mentimeter, but we'll move on to that and some discussion again.
Yeah, so in the Mentimeter, we want to know if there's any other criteria we're missing. We want, for the criteria that Malachi just presented, you know, what is your level of agreement with each one? And any other policy direction for homestead uses that we should be considering for the update. So basically we want whatever your thoughts are based on what you just saw, based on what you know. Cora, did you still have a comment to make? Your hand is still up, that's why. Oh, okay. While we wait, looks like only, what do we got? One person took the Menti.
I think a few
Two
more,
people.
but one person is active.
Problem get on this Menti thing. I don't know. Everyone else no have problems. I'm having problems. How do I get on this?
Auntie, I just posted a link in the chat too. It might be easier just to click that link, and I think it'll take you directly.
Oh, there we go. Okay,
Oh, good
thank you.
idea. Yep.
Hello. Could you go back a slide so we can see what the criteria are so that we answer the question? That would be easier for us to refer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good
for that
idea.
Suggestion. Okay. Internet service. I see that one.
I think advance it to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one. Thank you.
So while you guys are going through the Menti, does anyone just have any comments they want to share? Or thoughts? Or you can just answer the questions instead of doing the Menti too.
Yeah, I was just looking at number 2. I think I put it in the chat. This is Ho'anani. Number 2, I was just looking at if this is residential, then potable or clean water resources would be something that we would certainly need to consider. If we're putting people there, that should be funny. I think we should just make sure to mention clean water.
Yep, absolutely. Good one. Okay, I got iPad and then Auntie Blossom. iPad, go ahead. Still muted. iPad, your hand is up? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so my community in Kauai High does not have water access, but in the regional plan, there's a list of ways to get water, potable water. But how do you get it activated? I mean, it's the department that's sitting on it. Because in the community, we join all the community advisory councils, we attend all the community meetings to make sure that those accesses to these water resources stay available to Kauai High. But we don't have any water in Kauai High to use for homesteading. And our water is at the highest rate on the county that it's kind of expensive. You know, pretty soon we're going back to the ocean for our. So how do we get that in our general plan to include communities like us to get water anyway? Thank you.
So just to comment on Jojo's comment, so perhaps the criteria about, in addition to clean water, but water that a water source or water system that is also affordable for beneficiaries as well, just to kind of capture that thought.
Okay. Yep. I think we all can agree that's important too. Blossom, did you have a comment?
Yeah, actually I did. Thank you, Jared. You know, I was looking at your list, and one of the things that came to mind was item number 4 on your list, where it talks about having access to or include all of these areas. So, you know, and I want to go back to what Auntie Cindy Freitas was saying about, you know, we spend a lot of time and energy in developing these long-term plans, only to have the long-term plans not fully vested because things change, right? Commissioners change, chair changes. But I think primarily I'm asking everybody on the call to understand this, is that, you know, when we work on these kind of community plans, we definitely want to have access to open space, parks, community gathering places, and all of the other elements that we use to create a healthy community. But you got to know that if the legislature, who is the funding source, sets a priority that is vastly different from what we want, the department has no choice but to use the money the way the legislature says they have to use it. So if the priority is homestead lots and it's residential homestead lots, they're going to build residential homestead lots, and there may not be land available within that community to be able to develop our community spaces. So, you know, there clearly there needs to be some mechanism in place that allows for these kinds of activities to happen in every future homestead community development, whether it's residential, ag, or pastoral. A community is community, and we all need to have community space for us to be able to function and thrive. And the other thing is Andrew, when we talk about these community spaces, whether it's urban, suburban, rural, they all should have an area for commercial development for mercantile licenses to be put into place, okay? Because you cannot have a healthy, thriving community without an economic arm that goes with that. Okay, so, and I think that that kind of stuff is gonna come out in your island plan and your regional plans. But I think there needs to be a place in the general plan to make sure that these land use designations clearly identify and articulate those kinds of activities in the land use designations.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I don't see any hands up. Malachi, let's go. Go back to the first Menti question. Just wanted to see what some of the stuff people were writing down in there. Other criteria appropriate? Economic technology. I think I saw a comment about internet access also was important. Clean water, get people on the land. Owner builder, heard that earlier too. Subsidize, safe neighborhood, safe roads, Lahipana. Okay, looks pretty good. Yeah. How about the next question? Let me check it out so we can move on to the non-homesteading. But okay, so for the draft policies on establishing criteria for homesteading lands, for the most part, kind of agree with some of these draft policies, but I think based on the discussion we've been having tonight, a bunch of them got to get tweaked. You know, we're going to add clarity. We want to ensure we're hitting the right points, particularly on water and other uses. So, okay, very good. Looks like 8 guys responded to this, but we got 40 guys in here. So hopefully the rest of you guys can get onto Menti. You're not having too much problems. Okay, what other policy directions should be considered for homestead land uses? So do we need more policy direction or change these economic opportunities to build capacity? Agree, yeah. Abandon lessees. Designated lands not be converted for non-beneficiary use, mercantile. Need more time? Great, go to the website. You have all of this stuff on there. You can take all the time, reasonable time you need. At least till February, I think. Business growth, help Hawaiians prosper and get them on the land. That's consistent with our vision. And education, same thing there. Okay, great. Menti will still be open, so don't feel like you got to rush through these responses. You can also answer these questions on the website, but let's move into the next one, non-homestead uses criteria. Go ahead, Malachi.
Okay, so actually we relatively quick because it looks at the same, pretty much the same criteria in a lot of ways when you look at the land characteristics, just kind of changing your frame. Right, so if we're looking for flat areas for homestead uses, areas that have really steep slopes are probably areas that are going to be designated for non-homestead. If areas with streams running through the middle of it, or areas with floodplains or waterways, we're going to have to be aware of that. Critical habitat, same thing. As Andrew mentioned, if there's cultural resources or large areas with cultural resources that need to be protected, we're not going to be looking at homestead uses there. We're looking at other non-homestead uses. So when you're looking at, I touched on it earlier in my part, but non-homestead uses is a much broader category than just thinking about building a home. Yeah. So what other considerations are there when thinking about what non-homestead uses can, right? The land still could be developable. Is the land developable? If it is, it opens up a different range of uses. Is it located in close proximity to infrastructure? Is it accessible? That's another one. Again, cultural resources and knowledge of the place will give a good idea of what, if it's non-homestead, what uses are culturally appropriate in that place. Compatibility of surrounding land uses, right? We're probably not going to want to put homes next to a landfill or something like that, a polluting area. Then if it's not available for homesteading, are there opportunities for the trust to generate income? Or what other opportunities are there for beneficiaries to access and use the land? So again, we have policies that kind of articulate these. I'll read through them, and then you can jump ahead if you want to get a head start on the Menti. You can respond as I'm reading these too. So just skip ahead to the next ones. But the first one, allow access for appropriate uses of non-homestead land that provide direct benefits to beneficiaries and or the trust. Another one along those lines is allow beneficiary access to trust lands for activities such as cleanup and stewardship, subsistence activities, cultural practices, education, etc. Clearly communicate protocol and kuleana that beneficiaries and DHHL must follow when accessing non-homestead lands. Seek partnerships with other beneficiary serving organizations to facilitate access and responsible management of trust lands. And then the last one we have, again, these are not in order of importance, but the last one we have is incorporate revenue generating opportunities for the trust where determined appropriate and supported by market analyses.
Okay, Malachi, leave it here. The next slide is basically the same set of Menti questions, but for the non-homesteading uses. So why don't you guys all, get into the Menti, go answer those questions. And then looks like Freire Sohana, you have a question again. Go ahead.
Yes, for this non-use homestead land, like I said, we've been voicing, we live in Kona, and there's that 200 acres down by Honokahau Harbor. We have been long asking for a boat harbor or a boat place because a lot of our people are fishing people, Lavaias. And I see parking their boat on the road in the homestead because there's no other. Hold on. Let you wait. I'm doing something. I'm doing my homework. I see they are in need of boats to park in a non-use area, homestead area. And you guys may consider that because a lot of our people is Lavaias. To make something for them or have something for them or have them design something for them instead of giving them to the commercial use. And it's close to the harbor, number one, where they can launch the boat out there, especially lands that are close to the harbor, where there's access already there, where there's, places where they can take their fish.
Yeah, I think that's a good
That's
comment.
We've been voicing that for over 10 years. Actually 20, ever since Laipua came out. And we found out that you guys had earmarked at 200 acres, which is supposed to have been our ag land for commercial use. But we want it back for our ag land, honestly. Because it's adjacent to a state ag property. So it's still good use. In other words, there's 100 acres. Well, you guys trying to promote the other 100 acre for solar panel farming, which I object to that. Give it to the people because that is usable for ag. Like I said, the state adjacent to that is ag land too. And they're the same everything. So I don't consider Honoka Harbor as non-use. People can use them. Hawaiian people use anything on land, they'll make it work. We're a culture people. We make everything work. Even though if we have to put a rock wall around it to put the dirt inside so it doesn't go away. That's how they used to farm. In areas like that. So there's a history of that. So maybe you guys can consider a lot of the non-use area that you guys consider non-use, really throw it out to the beneficiary that really can utilize that area for their own purposes too.
That's a really good point. That just because it's non-homestead use doesn't mean it's unusable. I think one of the things that we wanted to emphasize in the plan is that even for the non-homesteading uses, we should look at the land use designations from the lens of how can the land use designation, even if it's not for homestead, homesteading benefit our beneficiaries or the trust, or how can our beneficiaries use the land in a way that is beneficial to them? And so that's one of the things that we want to capture, is that just because it's not used for homesteading doesn't mean that there isn't a benefit to beneficiaries in the way that the land can be used.
Great. Thank you for the comment. Cora, go ahead.
Auntie Fredas, thank you. Because, Molokai, our subsistence is fishing. And I just wanted to share that we don't have access on the east side where our people go holo holo. We don't have access to any launching area. But guess what? A lot of the fish ponds all over there, and we don't even have access to a few of them. And so, Andrew, I was thinking along the line of, working with the state, and have the state, in regards to the fish pond, should go to the beneficiaries that is adjacent to the closest homestead. If the homestead are interested in taking care of the fish pond, and maybe looking at doing a launching area for our people that have boats, or swapping lands. If the state can swap with DHHL in their initiative asking, what about DHHL asking them for the purpose of our beneficiary? And I would be interested to hear what the beneficiary feels about that, especially from Molokai. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ho'onani, we're kind of running a little short on time, but go ahead.
Thank you. Just listening to what the two aunties are saying, what I was thinking about, and hopefully this is in line with what they were saying, is there anything in the criteria that would have some kind of like advisory board or beneficiary board that we could say for certain uses, that maybe the local homesteaders that are there are able to have some kind of a board, exactly what aunties are talking about, because they know they ma'a to the area that they're living in, and that they should have some kind of say if this is what the criteria is going to be. So that's kind of my mana'o. It's not fully developed, but that's kind of where I'm heading at, where what these two aunties are saying. Mahalo.
Yeah, good comment. Other criteria: consider kalo, mercantile, economic, homesteader, stop non-homestead term, still usable. Okay, consistent with kind of the stuff we've been talking about. Policy, proposed policies for non-homestead. Okay, same thing. Still kind of agree with what we've drafted for this meeting. But just like the last one, probably got to tweak quite a bit. Okay. Next. Mercantile use for beneficiaries. Operating and development funds should come from the state, not our lands. Revenue from our land should go to communities. Homestead uses should be viewed how beneficiaries could interface. Have a beneficiary current homesteader board. Okay, very good, very good. Let's keep it moving into the water resources section, Malachi, and then we have one more Mentimeter thing, I think. Yes, and then we'll get into infrastructure. So we really got to get to infrastructure also tonight.
Yeah, we're gonna move through this. This is pretty quick, just because this is not an important subject, but because in 2014 the Hawaiian Homes Commission adopted the water policy plan, and which set forth kind of the strategy and direction for water related issues of the department. So the general plan really is going to reiterate those policies from the water policy plan. We are proposing two additional policies. There's no criteria in this section, but just these policies we'd like to get your feedback on. But I think it came up in that criteria, but the two new policies that would be added on top of the DHHL water policy plan policies are incorporating water needs and water resource availability into DHHL land use planning. And then if a DHL takes water out of the ground for homesteading, it should also develop watershed management strategies to encourage water recharge. So looking at the long term when possible. yeah. So if anyone has thoughts on those, I'll leave this up, and you guys, if you want to move ahead on the Menti, same drill. Couple of hands. Oh, Jared, you're muted, but
What a waste. So there's two Mentimeter questions on the water policy statement slide. Go ahead and answer those. And in the meantime, Lois Lee, I see your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I live in Kalavahine, and you know, they're supposed to build a water tank out here, and it's the sort of putting our community against one another because some are for it and some are not. So why didn't they build that before we came here? So we wouldn't have to be going through this. Like, I'm 82 years old and I feel really bad about it. You know, like if I'm for it, my thought about it is whatever will be. If it comes to the tank gets built, I'm okay. If it doesn't get built, I'm okay. But in the meantime, there's so much bitterness that I feel like I don't even want to go outside. Can you enlighten me about what's the progress about this place? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mahalo, Lois, for that question and comment. And just
Did you hear me?
yes, yes. So I think so for everyone else's context on the call, what Lois is referring to is a water tank that the city and county of Honolulu is proposing to build next to the community. And it has raised some concerns. The city and county of Honolulu has expressed the need to develop the water tank because more storage is needed for the system in the area that services the homestay community as well as the surrounding area. So that's just kind of the context. I think for the purposes of the general plan update, I think one of the mana'o out of this mo'olelo about Kalohine is that perhaps we should also look at criteria for citing city and county infrastructure, or citing infrastructure that might affect homestead communities, both positive and negatively. I also see Cedric on the call. Cedric, did you want to add anything related to?
Aloha, Andrew. Thank you for the question. You know, I think that it's my understanding that specific to this area, the land was originally under the jurisdiction of the state county and then was transferred to the department with the condition that they may hold on to the option to make the installation of the water tank happen later on. And the installation of the tank was disclosed to all of the owners prior to their acceptance of the homestead award. But you know, to the lessee's point, it has caused a lot of filikia in the community, and you know, the department is efforting to, you know, build a bridge back with this community and sort of resolve some of these issues. And you know, we've been working on that for the last couple of weeks, and we'll continue to do so.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Let's see, Ms. Freitas and then Cora. If you guys can keep it brief, go ahead. Ms. Freitas.
Yes, so this water you guys talking about, groundwater, that would be part of county to build infrastructure? Is that what I'm hearing?
Can you ask the question again? Sorry.
You guys had mentioned county. County is gonna get involved to make water tank on Hawaiian Homestead. Is that what you said? To make water tanks? Infrastructure?
Yes, in Papakolea, the city and county is planning to put a water tank.
So my question is the logistics for the billing, has that been planned out, or is it gonna be, because I see how much in Papakalea, how much they pay for water lines. Flat rate, $83, whether you use the water or not. So that is a concern everywhere else, especially in Kona for us, because we have a lot of underground water here. And I don't, in the future, I don't want to see getting charged that much of a water which Papakalea is getting charged. Because right now we pay $83 flat rate. So, and the water's, because of the infrastructure, the maintenance, it's all tagged up and the consumption is only $10. This is what I'm afraid of, in partnershiping with an entity that's gonna tag us a lot of money for all this, when we're paying for all that stuff for water that belongs to the people as it is. It's underneath the Hawaiian homestead land, period. And that water belongs to everybody. That is my concern.
Okay.
My mom lives Papakalea. I know that. She's complaining about the water bill. I cannot see we paying a lot of money for this. I can't. I mean, that's a lot of money, $83. And she's on fixed income. For the long run, I'm looking for the long run of us kupunas right now. We're gonna be at fixed income. And that's a big scare. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think we hear that. Cora, go ahead.
Okay, real quick, I did want to say that for all the land use for kuleana or subsistence ag that currently don't have water on that type of land use, that the DHL had already set the precedence of providing a water tower for these areas. So I just want to say that, you know, that should be also identified. I also want to say that for the areas that are other resources entity like Maui County, I just want to say that they're wasting 1,000 gallon every time they check the pressure. 100 gallons. So for 5 minutes, for every minute, 200 gallon has been discharged. And they probably check it for 5 minutes. So that's 1,000 gallons. So I just want to put it out there that, you know, that's our water that they're wasting. Mahalo. Just want
Okay.
to.
Let's see, we got through a bunch of the comments on the Menti, and Malachi's been cycling through them. Hopefully you guys have been able to see them while we're having this discussion, but let's move into infrastructure. I want to give Melissa about at least 20 minutes to cover infrastructure, which was the third of the policy topics for tonight. So go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, you're muted.
And I would add that the results from all the Menti and, you know, the discussions from this meeting, we're going to be posting to the website. Melissa said she can't unmute herself. Let's see if we can do it for you. Nope, I can't unmute. I can't unmute you. Oh, looks like you're good now. I don't know. Let's see.
Okay, can you hear me
Oh,
now?
yeah, there you go.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. Okay, let's get right into this since we have limited time left. So next slide. So we already started talking a little bit about infrastructure, and as we mentioned before, one of the requirements for the general plan is to establish level of service standards for infrastructure, and I'll get into what that means in a minute. But the goals and the policies for infrastructure will speak to how DHHL provides infrastructure to homesteads, what infrastructure is necessary to meet community needs and expectations, and how infrastructure should be considered when DHHL plans and develops its lands. So, you know, we've been doing some research and talking with beneficiaries and DHHL staff, and we've identified a bunch of issues related to how infrastructure is managed currently on DHHL lands. As you guys know, DHHL has a certain amount of resources. And so when you spend, there's trade-offs in how you spend resources, whether it's on developing new homesteads and infrastructure or maintaining and operating existing infrastructure. And over time, the amount spent on new homesteads versus maintaining existing infrastructure has changed a little bit. Right now, it's about 50-50. However, a lot of homestead communities are aging, and right now the department expects that operations and maintenance is going to exceed the amount that they have available for new development pretty soon and trend in that direction. So that's an issue to consider. There's also a lot of resources associated with DHHL managing its own water systems. So DHHL isn't really set up to act as a water utility. And so when they're not able to connect to county systems and they have to manage their own systems, that taxes the staffing and resources that they have. And it also creates some issues because providing clean potable water is a public health and safety issue. So it's a big thing for DHHL to take on. There's been some experimentation with having different parties manage DHHL infrastructure, and there's been some successes, some challenges. So let's just chalk that up to mixed results. Another thing that's coming up for DHHL is that the state is requiring all cesspools to be replaced by 2050. So that would include those that are on DHHL lands, so that there's going to be a need to be a plan for how to do that. Sometimes there's differences in what beneficiaries expect versus what the department provides when it comes to infrastructure, and that can create challenges. And then going forward, the department's going to have to think a lot more about sea level rise and climate change, both with regard to existing infrastructure and future. And then finally, you could think a lot about where DHHL is now in terms of, they've been providing infrastructure solutions that are kind of 20th century, so traditional water, sewer, but what new technologies or 21st century solutions might they consider that might make it easier for them to serve beneficiaries, especially in more remote places? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Next slide. So apologies for all the words on this, but it's helping us organize our points. So DHHL thinks about infrastructure, right now, the way that they manage it is through the land development division largely. And if you read the island plans, there's usually infrastructure expectations associated with each land use designation. So it'll say residential, agriculture, here's what you can generally expect for infrastructure. However, that's not consistent across all of DHHL's plans. And there's also no consistent kind of system or criteria for what kind of infrastructure they provide for each type of homestead. Because of the issues that I mentioned before, there's generally a preference to develop infrastructure to county standards, and then after it's built, to dedicate the systems to the counties so that the counties are responsible for ongoing operations and maintenance. Again, that comes back to DHHL not really being set up for as a utility and the resources required for them to do that. DHHL does own 3 potable and 1 non-potable water systems. They all operate at a loss and are subsidized by trust funds. And to manage these systems, DHHL is looking at establishing a water branch, because they are responsible to make sure that these systems serve these communities. But they don't want to take on additional water systems because they're not set up for that and the resources don't exist. So, and then the last point, I think you folks probably are aware, typically DHHL provides infrastructure for homestead areas, but for non-homestead, it's usually on the developer or the organization that's using the land to provide it. Next slide. So some things that we heard from the beneficiary survey that DHHL did last year. This was a statewide survey. We heard that there was the greatest desire for turnkey homes or lots with infrastructure at minimum. And that strong demand still exists for ag lots, and there's still some demand for lots with no infrastructure or kuleana lots. There's also a lot of lessees that need current repairs, and a lot of them are financially not able to handle those repairs themselves. So this is something for the department to consider also. Next slide. All right, so going back to the requirement of infrastructure level of service. This was the HAR requirement that the general plan has to address. So what is level of service and why would it be helpful? It would actually help DHHL set priorities for where to develop, because if they're unable to meet the level of service, then they might prioritize a different area over another area. It would help them simplify budgeting, because if there's a specific standard associated with different kinds of land use, then the land development division could automatically know what kind of infrastructure to provide. It helps get everyone on the same page about what type of service is expected in each type of area. And it helps DHHL standardize their delivery of these services. Okay. So when you think about making level of service standards, they obviously have to conform to legal and regulatory requirements, but they should also reflect beneficiary needs and desires. And so that's why we're talking about this in these meetings. Oh, what happened? We lost our slide. Are we there? Okay, there we go.
I'm just sharing my screen. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Keep going. Thanks.
All right. So, and then there's also going to be site-specific considerations, what resources exist in the environment. And then finally, whether you're talking about water or wastewater or electric, you'll need to, there are industry standards and practices that have to be followed as well. So next slide. All right, so coming back to the topic of 21st century infrastructure, and given that much of DHHL lands are in remote areas that might be far from existing water and sewer systems, what might be some alternatives? And there are technologies, some new, some old, that could be considered, and we'd love to hear your mana'o on what you'd like to see explored on DHHL lands that, or what you'd like to see more of for some of these areas. Let's go through the next few slides and we'll go through some examples of this. So wastewater, there's solutions that for both individual homesteads as well as neighborhoods, and can be an incinerating toilet that doesn't need a sewer system, units for septic and aerobic treatment, and those could be per house or in small clusters of houses. There's even worm treatment for wastewater, and all of these systems, like the one on the bottom, they incorporate kind of environmentally friendly solutions as well. So you're treating wastewater using natural processes, and it's a little bit more sustainable than a wastewater treatment plant. Next slide. And then if you're thinking about water and drainage, kind of the way that people and planners are thinking more about water these days is all water is a resource. You know, water has the potential to be a resource or a problem, depending on what's happening. But if you view all water as a resource, then and think about ways to conserve it and capture it and use it and also replenish the aquifers, there's a lot of opportunities to incorporate that into homesteads. And so that could look like capturing water in rain barrels for irrigation, or even for potable water where that's allowed. And it could involve having more green spaces to absorb stormwater and treat stormwater, like a rain garden. And there's a whole bunch of green infrastructure type opportunities that could be looked at. Next slide. And then solid waste. So there's, you know, individual homestead as well as even some cities are doing large scale composting facilities. So that wouldn't treat all kinds of waste, but it would help reduce a lot of the solid waste that has to go into a landfill and potentially give back to the land to make it better for agriculture. Next slide. And then of course, there's all the energy solutions, from the things that you can put on your roof to the bigger infrastructure installations that can help provide power in an off-grid type environment. And, you know, some of them are subject to whether there's sun or wind, and other ones can provide energy all the time. And if you add batteries, then the energy is available more readily around the clock. Next slide. All right, so, you know, I went through those kind of quickly, but if any of those caught your attention and you have other ideas, we'll be discussing that, and love to hear if you liked or didn't like any of those solutions. But right now, let's talk about the proposed level of service for homestead uses. So this is our first cut at thinking about what infrastructure should be provided on these different land use designations that Malachi presented earlier. So these are the homestead uses, and you can see that the residential and subsistence ag, the preference is to build to county standards where they can connect to the existing infrastructure. And you know, that's again, so DHHL doesn't need to own and operate these systems. And then for subsistence ag, there also needs to be a water source for irrigation, and that can be non-potable water. Under the right-hand column, design contingencies, that kind of acknowledges that not everything is an ideal situation. So when that happens, what are the alternatives? And so some residential areas are a little bit more rural and could be appropriate for septic. There are minimum lot sizes required for that. Could be, and those individual systems that I showed on the other slide could also work in those areas. And then of course, I think residential and agricultural communities could also look at incorporating some of those technologies like water catchment and renewable energy. And if they're in rural areas, they could have more rural type roads instead of full curbs and gutters. So I think, you know, that pretty much applies to all of these, that you could incorporate some of these interesting technologies to try to make them more self-sufficient. And then, oh, I'm not quite done with that slide yet. Okay, supplemental and pastoral and kuleana, you can see that they're a lower level of infrastructure. So more unpaved roads, non-potable water provided for the agricultural uses. For kuleana, it's just unpaved access roads, and it's up to the homesteaders to provide off-grid infrastructure, which may include some of those systems that we looked at. Next slide. And then the more dense mixed use ones, these really need to be built to county standards. You can incorporate some of those more innovative technologies to save water and energy, but because they're so much denser and, you know, intense, they need to be serviced by water and sewer that are on a larger scale. Next slide. And then for the non-homestead uses, you know, stewardship, conservation, and special district, those are all, you know, not really intended to be developed. So there's not really an expectation for providing infrastructure. However, for stewardship kind of activities or the types of community activities that we heard about, there might be some basic roads or off-grid kind of very light footprint type things that could be provided in those areas, either by DHHL or by the people using the areas. And then in community use areas, you know, those types of things might be like schools and farmers markets and things like that. Those preferably would be built to county standards and connected to water and sewer, but in some cases they might be able to have septic tanks or more rural type infrastructure. And community agriculture would require irrigation, and industrial, again, would need to be built to county standards. Okay, next slide. All right, so what does this all mean for DHHL policy? Here's our first cut at some of the policies for infrastructure. So again, prioritizing development in proximity to existing infrastructure. This will help ensure that infrastructure is available to support the development. Design infrastructure to county standards and dedicate systems to the counties whenever possible. Establish coordination and agreements with county planning and infrastructure agencies. You know, since the department is reliant on county infrastructure, to having these relationships and developing agreements with the counties will help avoid having to go back and negotiate this every time DHHL wants to do a homestead community. Number 4 is establishing a water branch to manage DHHL systems. Number 5 is explore detailed level of service criteria for rural development. 6 is continue to research emerging and experimental technologies, and then look at communal management of infrastructure systems where feasible. So that could be with homestead associations or with other groups that are interested in managing infrastructure. Okay, let's go to our discussion and Menti poll, and I'll hand it back over to Jared for that.
Okay, I got about 5 minutes left in our time schedule together. So hopefully you guys are still in the Menti and you can see these questions and you're answering it. Cora, do you have your hand up?
I just wanted to make a comment. This is so much information. I having a hard time track right now. My brain is on full load and I got to exit out. This is too much all at once. But I appreciate everything. I might just look it on you guys' website. I'm so sorry. Just too much. I got to exit.
Yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot.
Though. Maybe you guys can dissect portion of it at a time and you get more quality and more production than rushing it through and getting us into this and no more time to really process. It's not productive. For me, it's not. I'm not going to talk for anybody else, but I like to do a good job. And if I cannot do 100%, I don't want to be involved in this. It's just too much. But mahalo, I appreciate it. All your hard work. Thank you. Mahalo.
Hello, Cora. Just a quick note. Yeah, we apologize for the amount of information. We didn't want to make it overwhelming. I think what tonight was meant to be was kind of to set up this larger land use question, because we're going to take, as you said, take chunks of it in the future conversations coming up over the course of December, January, and February. So this is kind of the overview, if you will, of this conversation. But thank you for your manao.
Bye, Cora. Thanks. And you kind of hit the idea, right? The open house has all this information. You can go at your own pace and go through that. So that's why we have an open house online also. Oh, Nani, go ahead.
I just wrote in the comments, but I just wanted to say that I know with the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, I'll just read what I put in there. What is DHHL's accountability to the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act to provide the infrastructure for the beneficiaries? So it kind of seems like what I'm hearing is this a discussion for DHHL to not do their responsibility? Is asking us to figure out something that I guess is the responsibility for the department. So we're diversifying, and I totally get that it's growing and the needs are growing and it's changing. But even like, for instance, even hooking up to like the city and county, that's still the infrastructure that's being talked about for future, right? That's still really DHHL's responsibility to the beneficiaries to provide that. And I know that this is the discussion, so it's more of a comment, actually a concern, because we're really kind of getting away of from what the Commission Act really holds for the beneficiaries. Okay, mahalo.
Mahalo for that. And I think you're right. We should reference sections in the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act that reference infrastructure. I think that the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is always our foundation. So anytime we can reference portions of the act in our plans, I think it's a good practice. And then secondly, I think this is just kind of going into the weeds, so I might regret this, but there is a portion in the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act that says DHHL will build the infrastructure and that the county shall maintain. So I think that practice of the department building infrastructure and then turning it over into the county has been a result of the department following what is written in the what one section of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act says.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. We're at 8 o'clock, so let's look at the Mentimeter responses and then wrap this up. I don't want to keep you guys too late or beyond our time. Alternate technologies you'd like to see used in Hawaiian Home Lands, home network, renewable energy, waste management, composting toilets, satellite energy, solar panels, batteries. Okay, kind of consistent with some of the stuff Melissa was showing. This is the policies. Should I move your mouse? I can't really tell what's happening with that one. Oh, okay, we got some 3s and 4s, so not as strong as some of the agreements with the other homestead criteria policies. Design infrastructure to county standards, we just talked about that one. I can understand why that's a 3. Detailed level of service, agree with that. Conduct research and development on emerging technologies, agree with that. Basically, explore communal management of infrastructure systems, generally agree to. Okay. What other policy directions should be considered? Renewable and clean energy. Infrastructure could mean jobs for youth at home. Education policy to infrastructure needs. Homestead organization can have economic opportunity, and no comment. Okay, let's explore our own system per homestead area, maybe having a board. I get it. All right, let's try and just do the next steps really quickly. Like I said, we'll be able to document all of these comments and the Menti results on our website. You saw this slide already. This just has the slate of upcoming topic meetings and the dates. This is on the website also. Next slide is the yeah, so that's just a reminder of where you can find all this information online. We have a fact sheet. The virtual open house is open again, and you'll be able to sign up for the upcoming Zoom meetings there also, just like you did for this one. Next slide. Just the contacts. This is also on the website. You got Andrew and Melissa's contact there. And that was the last slide. So it looks like somebody had a question about in-person meetings. What? Are we having in-person meetings for any of these? I don't think so. Is that correct statement, team?
For the meetings that are coming up in November, January, February. Sorry, did I say that? November,
this-
December, January, and February. For this round, they will be virtual. What we're hoping for is that during the summer, the last round of meetings that we can come back in person, is hopefully, things with COVID will be more settled, with kids getting their vaccinations, and hopefully we can start to return to normal. I think although we can't meet in person, one of the things that I enjoyed tonight was that, we heard from people from Papakolea, from Kona, from Kauai High, from Molokai. It does allow us to have a conversation across communities, across islands, about general policies that will apply not just to one specific area, but the whole Pai'aina as it relates to Hawaiian Home Lands. So yeah, it's not the same meeting on Zoom, but at the same time, it does provide us an opportunity to have a statewide conversation on statewide policy. So it has its pros and cons, but again, looking at the last round of meetings, hopefully in the summertime, where we'll have a draft plan to go over with folks, we hope to have in-person meetings.
Okay, with that, I want to thank everyone also for joining the meeting and the discussion tonight. And we're past our time, so we're going to close the meeting. If we didn't answer all the questions in the chat, apologies for that. We'll get to it.
Hello, everyone. Good night.
Mahalo, aloha,
Aloha, good night.
good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.